Good morning, my dear friends and students. Now, I would like to tell BCom 6th semester learners of Dibrugarh University about some activity ratios. Activity ratio measures the efficiency with which a firm manages its resources or asset. The different kind of activities ratio I would like to discuss now. Inventory turnover ratio. Inventory turnover ratio measures the efficiency in the use of inventory. It is expressed as a relationship between cost of goods sold and average inventory. This ratio is also known as stock velocity ratio. It is calculated using the following formula. Inventory turnover ratio equal cost of goods sold divided by average inventory. Cost of goods sold equal opening stock plus purchases plus direct expenses minus closing stock, or cost of goods sold equal sales minus gross profit. Average inventory equal opening stock plus closing stock divided by 2. In case the information about cost of goods sold is not known, and then inventory turnover ratio can be calculated using the net sales instead of it. Average inventory should be taken at the cost price, but if the cost price is not known, in that case, average inventory at selling price can also be considered. If the information about opening stock and closing stock is not available, then closing stock can be considered as average inventory. However, if information about closing stock is not available, then opening stock can also be considered the average inventory. Now, I would like to tell you inventory holding period. It is the average time for which the inventory remains in the business. Alternatively, it can be said that it is the average time taken to clear the stock. It can be calculated as days in a year divided by inventory turnover ratio. Next, I would like to tell you debtors turnover ratio. Debtors turnover ratio measures the number of times average debtors are turned over during a period, during a year. It indicates the efficiency with which the debtors are managed. It also reflects on the quality of the debtors. It is calculated as net credit annual sales divided by average trade debtors. Trade debtors consist of sundry debtors, bill receivable, and accounts receivable. The provision for bad and doubtful debt should not be deducted from the debtors. They should be taken at gross value. Average trade debtors should be calculated as follows. Opening trade debtors plus closing trade debtors divided by 2. If the information about credit annual sales is not available, then total sales can be considered instead of it. Similarly, if the information about opening debtors and closing debtors is not available, then the closing debtors can be taken as average debtors. However, even if the information about closing debtor is not available, then opening debtors can be used for average debtors. Debtors collection period. Debtors collection period indicate the average number of days for which a concern has to wait before its receivable are converted into cash. It is the time taken by the debtors of firm to make payment of their dues. It is calculated as follows: days in a year divided by debtors turnover ratio. Now I will focus on creditors turnover ratio. Creditors turnover ratio measures the efficiency with which the creditors are turned over during the year in an organization. It is the relationship between trade creditors and annual credit purchase. It is calculated as net credit annual purchase divided by average trade creditors. The trade creditors consist of sundry creditors and bills payable. Reserve for discount on debtors is not taken into account while calculating total creditors. Average trade creditors are calculated as opening trade creditors plus closing trade creditors divided by 2. If the information about credit annual purchase is not available, then the total purchases can be considered instead of it. Similarly, if the information about opening creditors and closing creditors is not available, then the closing creditors can be taken as average creditors. However, if even the information about closing creditor is not available, then the opening creditors can be used for average creditors. Next, creditors payment period. Creditors payment period represents the average number of days taken by the firm to pay off its creditors. It is calculated as follows: days in a year divided by creditors turnover ratio. Now, last one, I would like to tell you about working capital turnover ratio. Working capital is calculated as the excess of current assets over current liabilities. The working capital turnover ratio indicates the number of times the working capital is turned over during the year. It is calculated using the following formula: cost of sales divided by average working capital. Average working capital equal opening working capital plus closing working capital divided by 2. When the information about cost of sales is not available, the figures of sales can be considered instead of it. Similarly, if the information about the opening working capital is not available, closing working capital can be considered average working capital. In case if information about closing working capital is not available, then the figure for opening working capital can be considered average working capital. With this word, I finish my talk for today. Thank you so much.